In the KUAF News Zoom room, we're going to bring on the government of Guam historian, Malia Ramirez, who, buenas bananas of Zeus. Malia, good morning.
Uh, Ginekuyanda from the rising of the sun, Chris. Ginengwaw Lokui, dito soon mo na. Pinota Pagunahawan. Let us now begin our conversation today.
Right on. So, Malia and Jason has popped up your articles that you had written on the Guampedia. But first, I wanted to kind of ask you about this the Elcano. Is it Elcano, the Spanish vessel that just sailed into Guam? Because there was a lot of different feelings about this. No, Malia, where people were kind of saying, why are we welcoming the Spanish? Other people were saying, um, colonizer, whether it's American, Japanese, or Spanish. But then there were also people who were saying that this was a chance for forgiveness and to kind of look not just to the past, but to the future, like a shared future, right? So, what did you think of all those different dialogues and feelings that were being had over the last week or so regarding this 500th anniversary of the circumnavigation of the globe by Ferdinand Magellan?
Well, Chris, thank you for the question. The official name of the ship is Juan Sebastian de Elcano, and he was the one that completed the voyage because Magellan was killed in the Philippines. So he is also credited as the navigator who circumnavigated the globe with the last remaining crew members that I remembered about 17, the original. Remember that when the expedition began in 1519, there were 5 Carracks that left Spain, Cadiz, Spain. By the time they reached the Estrecho de Magallanes, the Straits of Magellan, only 3 ships made it into the Pacific. And those 3 ships arrived here in our islands of Marianas, Guam, and by the time they returned to Spain, which was nearly or a little bit over 3 years, only 17 and only 1 ship returned to Spain. That is the Victoria that visited Guam. Now, your question about the one called remembrance, commemoration, recalling, and it is a sensitive subject
Hmm.
because of what had happened in the 3 days of the encounter between our Sinus, Imansamoru, and Imangilago, the Spanish crew members, and they were missing. But history to me, and I've been in history for so long,
Right.
over 5 decades, history is history. So we go back at the time that this event occurred and try to understand what happened 500 years ago. And in my viewpoint, as an historian for Guam, what I did, because we are Sinus, didn't have a written record, the Spanish did. And so what had happened in the translation there was that the written records prevailed over the oral history. But then how can I, as a Chamorro, go back 500 years to recall this past? And this is in all of my writings. I look at the Chamorro language, the lexicons that are used to describe the event, and still it didn't change the event. It was a very tragic event. And why do we recall? It's like any other event that has happened in our history of more people in the Marianas. I always say Marianas. It's not just Guam. It's Islas Marianas. We were one under them. We weren't separated. And there's a very deep, profound Chamorro proverb that goes like this, ani, which simply means in the English, the winds of change.
Hmm.
Since the arrival of this expedition in 1521. And in this wind of change, there is no governance as to how this Talani or the Talan will take place in the 500 years that we have been exposed to the Western world. And due by the fact of our location here in the Pacific, the Marianas became like the stepping stone between the East and the West. And look how many events that have occurred here on our island, Chris. Not just the tragic events of the Magellan encounter, World War II, and all these other events that really impacted our island, which is, we have to say, is not of our doing. Like the elders of World War II, it is not of their making. But what do we do every year during this event of World War II on liberation? We go back and go back and go back and try to recall, remember, commemorate, celebrate the event as we try to understand it in our perspective as Chamorro people. I know that answers the question, and
Yeah,
I can see different groups
yeah.
having, why are we going to recall this event, which is so tragic in their eyes? But there are also other, what do you call that, insights, viewpoints of the event that occurred 500 years ago.
Malia, I wanted to ask, and yeah, I appreciate your answer, and I wanted to share my own personal thoughts on it. But I first wanted to go back because this kind of reminded me a little bit of Yokoi. Now, when they discovered Yokoi had been hiding out in the jungle, decades after the war, when I go through some of the old, like the newspaper articles or whatever, I mean, I'm not saying they celebrated Yokoi, but it was a big deal because people were like, "Oh my God, this guy hid out in the jungle for decades." But I'm wondering, and maybe you would probably, as the Guam historian, be in a good position to shed light on. I'm wondering, were there similar feelings with the Chamorro people back then compared to now, where we have some people who are saying, "Oh, why are we doing this for the Spanish?" They killed off the Chamorros. Was there ever a conversation like that when Yokoi came out of the jungle, where people were like, why are we, why don't we just run him back into the jungle for everything that they did during the war?"
Well, it's a good thing you asked that question. Chris, okay, in history, if you can understand this, and this is a Chamorro perspective. This is how my parents brought me up to understand all these events. So when you look at the Yokoi, what do you call that, history, are we celebrating really Yokoi as Chamorros, or are we celebrating the human manifestation of how a person under all these tribulations survived? Because we are, after all, humanidad, we are humanity. So when you go back 500 years of Magellan, all right, the first circumnavigation, that is world history. This is all part of it. It's not just a Chamorros, but history of civilization. And I really wish our Chamorros can understand that our historical timelines, four here in Guam, Norte Marianas, Northern Marianas, five, because they have the German administration. But if you look at those timelines of our history as Chamorros, you have to recognize the fact that the Magellan voyage here is world history. It's not just Marianas history and Spain's history. No, it's world history of humanity, endeavoring or whatever in the course of human civilization, understand this, as well as what had happened, okay, in the case of Yukoi, of the resolute and the and the strive to, what do you call that, understand humanity through the eyes of Yukoi, that he didn't surrender. And and this was done in CNN when Yukoi died, I believe, in 1996. And they had a simple app on Yukoi, and it was, man who didn't surrender. The man who didn't surrender to the wall surrenders to death. And we kind of see ourselves in this, all of us, all right, in this more larger picture of humanity and civilization. And in that way, I can appreciate the spirit of history.
Right. So I was in mass last Sunday, the last Sunday, and like I said, I got my own feelings about the Spanish ship coming, but it was so funny, Malia, because I was sitting there in mass and they did like a whole thing. I don't know if you watched the mass on Sunday, but they did this whole like prayer for everybody on the ship, from the admiral down to like the guy who cleans the toilet on this Spanish vessel. And then they did it in Spanish, and then they brought on like a Spanish priest, And then there was this photo opportunity at the end of the mass where they had the delegation from the Spanish vessel go up in front of the whole church and take a picture with the archbishop. But it was funny because I was just sitting there in my own thoughts about what this means, like historically, for this vessel to come back 500 years after coming to Guam. And then it hit me that I was sitting in a house that the Spanish built, the cathedral, right? And, the Catholic faith. So I thought it was kind of, for me, it was just interesting to reconcile whatever feelings I have about the Spanish and the ancient Chamorros while sitting in a place that was made possible because the Spanish came to Guam. So there's always that, for me, it's always interesting to kind of like balance, being pro Chamorro and celebrating ancient Chamorros, but then also accepting that these colonizers come here and leave us with things that we just carry on for become part of our culture, right? So I just thought that was interesting.
It's a good, again, it's a good thing that you brought up that point. But looking at the resilience of the Chamorros, your Chamorro, I'm Chamorro, and after 500 years, we're still here. Isn't that a celebration of us as a people? That we're not demised? Of course, all these things happen. And that's what the Panakagwitan is saying. The elders telling us that no matter what has happened in our islands of Marianas, who remains? Us. Go back to the World War II, what do you call that? Perspective that you were talking about. And I talk about this all the time, English and in Chamorro, when I talk to the students. And in Mapuigera, when the war ended, Hazi Manyaga, who stayed back from Mahasata Guam to rebuild Guam. Sa Isandalo Americano, the American soldiers went back home. Isandalo Japanese, ni Manlala, when you get to know that they went back home. But you, your grandparents, Guau, sinanounced about my mother and father, and their parents, they stayed back and they rebuilt this island and also the Northern Mariana. Always remember that. If anything, is our resilience as Chamorros to suun mo na ni isa to navigate our destiny, lalaksi with expediency, and look to the back, to look to the past, but also to see forward. It's really a very beautiful. Our history is beautiful, and if you read the records, you're right. By the time the missions were established here, could you imagine that we were down to 3,000 people in the entire Mariana Islands in some of the records, which had a population of estimated over 40,000, which I believe is even higher than that.
Right.
Fine. And we still identify ourselves as morals, no matter what. I have a lot of gratitude, celebration, celebratory, attitudes toward all of these events through our eyes, through the eyes of our parents, and through our history as a people.
Malia, we had a comment here. Well said. That's from Glenn Lujan. And I know, Mess Chamorro, you're doing a lot. I know you do a lot all the time, but kind of what's on your schedule for this month? Are you doing a lot of talks? I know that you wrote some pieces for Guampedia that we threw on the link to the comments in. But what else do you have going on for this month, Malia?
Well, this is what had happened for us, okay, with the event of the quincentennial of the Magellan Elcano voyage and the first encounter with the Chamorro. I actually began this, I would say, 5 years ago. I was already going to the school in the Chamorro class. I was telling the teachers, prepare your students to understand this event, no matter what lens you're using. Just let them know about the event. Unfortunately, because of the COVID issue, all those events that I had planned had to be curtailed. But what I did, Chris, all right, and I was a keynote speaker for the fifth Marriage History Conference. And my subject, which they asked me to do, was to talk about familia, family. And in any culture, Chris, La Familia is the haligi, the pillar of all society. So we as Chamorros do. All right. So what I did was I had to narrow it down to my family familial system because of all the rules and regulations that had to be adhered to. And I went with them. I had did slide presentations with them. We went on a tour to visit the Spanish sites, which I had wish I could have done for the school system. Unfortunately, that couldn't be done. We even went on a boat trip to look at the beautiful coastal area of what we call the Guam Seashore Park, so that my family can see the visual images that Magellan and his crew members saw when they were approaching Guam and when they landed in Umatic, which has never changed. If you take that uh, tour and you're going from Agate Bay to Malesso, that is exactly pristine how Magellan viewed our island when he came here on March 6, 1521. And so that's what I did. Now, you inviting me to your program, this is dissemination of information. And I hope Chris, the media is very powerful to communicate, especially now, where hopefully people who are listening to me can tell me whether they agree with me or not, at least they heard my viewpoint. In the same way that Wampedia published those 3 reflections I did on the Chamorro Magellan Elcano encounter, the first 3 days, and also through the venues or any media. And I have to say, and I have to thank all the media here in Guam for this, especially KUM throughout the years that I've been involved with Guam history or Marion's history. Is I couldn't afford to do any of this, really. But when you guys call me, the airtime, I consider all of that and how many people I can reach. Quanto natauto sinya uhago, gininiboso through my voice. The comprendis ti Chris, understand this Chris. I-voice sune, my voice, i-voice imananata. My voice is our elders' voices because that's how I learn who we are. And I'm just disseminating this information to our people.
Malia, thank you. I want to bring you on. I told you I want to bring you on. Maybe next week we can cover a different subject just for Mr. Moore. So I'll be in touch. But thank you again so much for your time, Malia. Wow, that was awesome.
Thank you so much for the time you've given me.
Of
and
course.
KUAM, the organization.
Okay, Malia. We'll see you next week. I'll call you.
Okay, bye-bye.
That's pretty deep. You know what he said about all the people who have come, because we're sitting pretty in the spot that we're at, and you know it's attractive to empires because we're kind of like that footprint in between a lot of places. So I like what he said about no matter who came and you know tried to kill us off, guess what, we're still here. If anything, we're still standing. Try harder, but don't. Take it.